Hello, Guitar Smarts fans. Before you check out this podcast, I want to make you aware of a cool new place where you can interact with other Guitar Smarts listeners. It's a Facebook group called the Guitar Geek Hangout. That's where we hang out and talk about all things guitar. So, if you like the Guitar Smarts podcast, come and chat with Kieran and myself over in the Guitar Geek Hangout on Facebook. Maybe check out some pre-podcast clips and even get involved in asking and answering lots of questions from the other page dwellers. Hope to see you there. What I think you should do is, after this podcast, I think you should start throwing keys at your guitars. Just start throwing stuff. Just get tools out and like drill bits and things, and just start tossing them at all your guitars, and it'll be painful. But in 10 years' time, when your guitars are worth nothing, and all you have is just a lot of scratched and broken wood hanging on your wall, you'll be reminded of this day, and you'll go, "Oh, that was a good day. I'm pleased that this."
That was the day it all finally got too much, and I couldn't take curating this collection anymore.
Greetings, welcome to this week's Guitar Smarts podcast. Thank you very much for downloading and listening. This week, Kieran and I are telling you why you should stop buying guitars. Not really. We don't think you should stop buying guitars, but we're asking the question, how many guitars do you really need? How many guitars do you want? What really does the guitarist need in their life to enjoy the music they play? And if you're a professional musician, how many guitars do you really need to do the job that you do? Because we all love having instruments. We all want more guitars. It's, gear acquisition syndrome is a real thing. So let's talk about it. Anyway, as usual, go down to our description to find some interesting links to where you can leave reviews for the podcast. You can find links to our social media pages as well, where you can communicate with us. You could also find links to our merchandise site on Etsy, and also you can find our Buy Me a Coffee page if you did want to come and contribute to the podcast. As always, if you want to help the show, the best thing you can do is leave those ratings or reviews on your favourite podcast app. Spotify and iTunes are the best place to do it, but there are other places too. And remember to like and subscribe so that when the next episode comes out, you get alerted and you never miss a show. Anyway, that's enough waffle from me. Let's get to it.
1 2 1 2. Yeah, mic's recording. Got my cup of tea.
Just need to turn your camera on so I can see your beautiful face.
How remiss of me.
There he is.
There I am.
Hello, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, really good, man. Really good.
Fantastic.
How are you?
Oh, splendid. Do you know what? Really good. Really good. It's been a good week. I feel like work is calming down a little bit. It's been a mad month.
Yeah.
Work's starting to calm down. I probably now said that, though. It'll go mad again. But it's good to be busy, isn't it? It's good to be busy. Yeah, man. Life's good. I'm okay.
That's good. That's good to hear,
Same
man.
as you. I've got a cup of tea, and that just makes everything, like a bucket of tea, pretty much, as well.
Yeah, that is a huge mug, man. It's been a while since we've spoken. It's been a couple of weeks, so I'm looking forward to a good catch up, mate. I think it might be a bit of a random one today, of all kinds of things that have happened over the last couple of weeks.
It could be a bit random, I think, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Hey, I've got to show you something quickly, though. One of my work colleagues.
What you got?
Because although I drink tea, I do love a decent coffee as well. And one of my work colleagues is an Egyptian. He went back to Egypt and he bought me one of these. I don't know if you've ever used one.
Oh, I haven't. I've seen one, but I haven't.
Yeah, it's
used
like a little stovetop coffee thing for making mud coffee or something, he said. So you leave all the coffee grinds in there as you drink it. You just let it settle. Yes. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm excited because it's a very unique way of making coffee. But anyway, apropos of nothing, just thought I'd share that with you. So,
well, mate, I'm there with you on that. I had my first proper Turkish coffee the other day when I went to this beautiful Turkish restaurant in Guildford, and I have work colleagues who are Turkish and who are religious about their coffee. They bring in those little devices that you've just shown me, and they make their own coffee at work. Even though we've got the most beautiful, expensive bean to cup machines in the office that are just like tens of thousands of pounds, they still insist on making their own coffee. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. I get it now though, because I tried this Turkish coffee properly made in this restaurant the other day, and my goodness, it was good. It was good.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love a fresh coffee. I've got beans downstairs and I grind them when I make a coffee kind of thing, so yeah, I love it. I have to have that. I've one with lunch, I think. But anyway.
No. This is a guitar podcast, isn't it?
This is a guitar podcast, yeah, not a coffee podcast.
We're not sponsored by...
We're not sponsored by anyone.
No.
So, hey, dude, what's new with you? Because I know you've since we last spoke, you've had first gig number 1 with new band.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I have.
How did it go, dude?
Yeah, it went really well, man. I mean, since we last spoke, I've had two rehearsals, well, an audition, 2 rehearsals, and gig with new band. Mate, all I can say is, what an absolute pleasure. First and foremost, I'm reminded of the podcast episode that we did quite a few episodes back, which was how to be in a band, right? Do you remember that one where we talked about some of the kind of technical aspects of being in a band to make it work musically and functionally and put on a good show for the audience. But we also discussed quite a lot of the softer stuff that actually is the important stuff about being in a team and, making it fun as well as, to a decent standard. And not since the band that you and I were in, Roadrunner, have I managed to find another band where there's that vibe, where they're solid players who take their music seriously, but they're just a really nice bunch of people as well, and the vibe is right. And that, I tell you what, it makes a whole difference. So really enjoying it. It's my first time as the only guitarist in the band, so it's a 4-piece, bass, drums, guitar and a singer. So it's really making me kind of look at how I learn these songs and then put them into context with the band in a way that you've spoken about on depth gigs and things that you've been on, where you really need to fill out the sound and make it work just, with one kind of melodic instrument. So that's pushing me in a different way, even though the songs are ones that I'm really familiar with, and they're the classic party anthem songs that you would expect from any good kind of function band. It's pushing me personally as a player, because I've always had the luxury of having another guitarist, a keyboard player, sometimes brass sections, whatever, to enrich the sound. But having to really do all of that yourself has pushed me in a different direction, even though the songs themselves are ones that I've played before in different bands. So yeah, I'm loving it. First gig went really well. Nice little pub, 15 minutes drive from my house, which almost sounds like cheating, doesn't it?
Yeah,
going out for a gig. It's like, I don't think the car had reached temperature by the time I arrived at the venue. It's like, this is all just too easy. As opposed to driving hours and hours to get to gigs. So 15-minute pub that I'd never played in before, didn't even know existed. Lovely vibe, lovely audience, perfect place to try out, new member of the band and stuff. And then it's going to, get bigger from there. So we've got a wedding gig in a couple of gigs time. So building up to that really. But
Fantastic.
Loving it, mate. Really loving it. And the frequency is right for me, which is like 1 to 2 gigs per month, which is really nice. And I'm also back doing dep work for the DLB, for Damien's band this year, which is nice.
That's cool.
I've got that set. After having just learned a full set list for one band, I've now got to go and relearn Damien's set list, but there's a good overlap. There's a good overlap in the numbers, albeit in different keys. So that is going to be the challenge for me.
That's at least you can kind of, there's a lesson to be learned there as well in transposition and being able to move around and understand things differently in different keys. You don't always have, what you need to start doing is use this time as an exercise to stop thinking about the chords themselves and start thinking about them as like 1, 4, 5, 6 and things like that, how they relate to the diatonic key. And then you can start going, well, I know it's a 1, 4, 6, 5 in C, so a 1, 4, 6, 5 in E is you start
this. And do you know what? That's exactly the approach that started to unfold in my head.
Yeah.
And it's, again, songs that I'm familiar with and know, but it's like, oh man, I've got to learn this exact same song in a different key. And then you start to do it and you go, this isn't as difficult as I thought. And it's teaching me those types of disciplines as well. And just learning more about, the space between different chords, how to navigate the fretboard and find these positions. And yeah, it's good. It's good fun. It's good fun.
Now, you said you were, last time we spoke, and I remember this because it's in the last podcast, you were talking about auditioning for this band or having your first rehearsal with them.
That's right.
And you said you were going to take out your silver American Deluxe Strat for this. Is that the guitar you took out for this gig as well?
It is. Yeah, I hadn't played it in a while, but I did set it up during lockdown and then got it all working nicely and then put it back on the rack and went, oh, that's great. I'll play that at some point. So it still had those strings on from months ago. They hadn't gone dead. So that was great. The strings were fine. Didn't need any tweaking. And yeah, that's the instrument now that I've played with this band, purely because it is the only guitar that I've got that SSH configuration in.
Yeah.
So it gives me a guitar that enables me to do the kind of funkier Strat type tones where certain songs need it. But then when I need to dig in and do some more rocky numbers, it's just a flick away to the humbucker. So
it's got some interesting switching, hasn't it, that guitar?
It has, man. Oh yeah, you've got good memory. You've got a really good memory.
I've got a very good memory. I've got a good memory for things that other people have that I don't.
So do you know what I've debated? Because I love the neck. So it's an American Deluxe. I want to say professional. I don't know if that's a range they do anymore, but it certainly was one they did before. So it's got a compound radius fingerboard on it, which is beautiful. So it gets nice and flat as you get up into the higher frets. But still great for chord work down on the lower open chord area. It's got locking tuners. It's got a roller nut. It's got a nice, proper professional style trem. And then one of the other features that it's got in this single humbucker configuration, it's got all this additional switching, which I do guitar tech stuff on the side, but I'm not looking forward to the point where I ever need to open up the cavity on this one and just have a look at how all this is wired, because it's just like. It's just like, what? So it's, so you've got your standard 5-way selector switch that operates between those, and then obviously volume and two tones, as you would expect. But then the volume knob itself is like a secret Fender style knob, because it looks just like a normal volume knob, Fender kind of top hat knob, but you can actually press it. And in pressing it thickens up the tone of each of those settings in quite a convincing way. It almost gives you like a more of a P90 type feel to the pickups, right? So it doesn't turn them into humbuckers in any way, but it just tonally does something to just thicken up each of those sounds. So you get a gruffer tone to all of it, which is quite nice. Then you've got another little switch, which is like a little tiny discrete just kind of micro switch as well, which allows you to just bypass all of the circuitry. None of this is active, it's all passive stuff. You press it and it literally routes straight to the humbucker, but bypassing all of the other wiring inside, so that you not only do you get a quick access to the humbucker if you need to, just by clicking this micro switch. I mean, arguably it might even be quicker just to flick the 5-way selector switch to the humbucker. But the advantages of this little micro switch is because it's bypassing all of that other wiring, it also gives you a little boost in the perceived volume as well from that humbucker that you wouldn't get just flicking to it on the 5-way selector switch, because it's bypassing all of that wiring. So between all of that, there's like limitless permutations of not limitless clearly, but there's loads of different tones you can get from it. Right?
I know what you mean,
But in true style, I use about two different sounds. I use the neck single coil, and I use the humbucker, and then occasionally I'll use the out of phase neck and middle for that kind of nice quacky funk type stuff. So I have debated just ripping it all out. Wow, that sounds very visceral, doesn't it? I have debated just snipping the leads to the jack socket and taking that fully loaded pick guard out, fully intact, because these are Fender noiseless pickups in it, and they're not cheap pickups in it. But just taking that whole fully loaded pick guard out and just dropping in something a little bit more vintage, traditional, with simpler switching, just seeing what that does. And I might still do that because there's some great fully loaded pick guard. I mean, I can wire it myself, but there's some really lovely fully loaded ones where I can literally just drop it in. And see. I've gone off on a massive tangent about that.
Well, I asked.
Well, you just asked if I'd used that guitar recently. The short answer would have been yes, Matt. I'm using that one again. It's really nice. Thanks for asking.
I'll tell you what, actually, because in a year of us doing this podcast now, I've had the same view of your guitar room every day, and I've never asked you about that Gibson 335 that you have, which is clearly that's obviously like an heirloom guitar, isn't it? Because have you ever gigged that guitar?
I think the real question should be: have I ever played that guitar?
Because it is just like, that is kind of like a bucket list guitar for lots of people. For me as well, a proper 335 is a bucket list guitar. And I just wondered, I've never asked really about if there's a story behind that guitar, if there's what kind of brought you to purchase that guitar, and whether you sit and play it occasionally, and if it's something that is like a, like I said, like an heirloom piece, something you don't intend to ever gig, and it's more of like a family museum kind of thing.
You're making me sound a little bit like Joe Bonamassa in Nerdville, but like an even more attentive one, because at least he plays and gigs his. But no, I don't have that many guitars, and
no, of course not.
This kind of is now bringing us onto the topic of this podcast.
It is actually. Maybe we should let's take a step back and introduce the main topic for this podcast, and maybe we can come back, circle back to that question about that guitar. Sorry to interrupt this interesting conversation. However, if you've listened this far, you should probably subscribe to the Guitar Smarts podcast. Go and do that now, and then come straight back. So this week we've very kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of named this podcast. What did we name it? What did we say? Why
you should stop buying guitars.
That's it. Why you should stop buying guitars. Because this is kind of like this is a gas conversation again, isn't it? This is gear acquisition syndrome. Something we're all guilty of as musicians, is that we always kind of covet the next thing, regardless of the things we have. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Especially if you're a professional musician. If you're a professional musician who is going to be called to gigs and working day in, day out, you're going to need a whole plethora of different instruments and tools to be able to, provide variety in the playing and the sounds that you can provide to other people, whatever the gig might be. So there's justification in that for always being able to kind of buy a new guitar if something interesting pops up. But for the more average Joe guitarist like you and I, is it a good thing to be collecting guitars? Should we I guess the question is, should we take a step back sometimes and think about, do we really need to spend money on another instrument, or should we invest that money, maybe time and effort, in things we already have? What's the right thing to do?
Oh man, what a question.
Yeah.
That's a killer question. You can argue this both ways, right? I mean, it is definitely tongue-in-cheek, because are we going to stop buying guitars?
Nope.
Probably not. Probably not anytime soon. But how many guitars do you really need? So for the jobbing guitarist like you and I, you probably need 2 guitars, right? 2 electric guitars. Maybe if you're doing some acoustic stuff, you have an acoustic as well, right? So maybe 3 guitars, right? And so long as you pick and choose which 2 or 3 guitars they are, that will cover you tonally for most things. And in fact, for most gigs, you're going to be playing your inverted commas number 1 guitar, and number 2 is there if a string breaks, or you need a different tuning quickly to access, or you just definitely need a different sound that number 1 can't give you. So you don't need a whole bunch of guitars for going out and gigging. But we like buying guitars because they're beautiful things to look at, and there's so much to choose from, and the variety is there, and there's always like the desire to get something else, whether that's wrapped up in the belief that it will make you a better player and give you that tone that you can't get, is a whole different like psychological like conversation maybe. But I don't know. I think my desire to keep buying guitars is getting less and less when I'm more active in gigging. When I'm left to my own devices and sitting around and not playing live, then my brain starts to go, well, yeah, I'm going to go and buy some more guitars and tinker around with them and all of that. And then when you get back into the routine of gigging, you go, oh, well, what's the point? I don't need it. If I'm not going to be using it this weekend, if I'm not going to be out playing it live, then what's the point? It's just going to sit on the wall. Which comes back to your question. Have I ever gigged that 335? No. Do I ever intend to gig that 335? No. What a travesty. I hate myself for saying those words. That's just like, what is the point? What is the point? So this is one of the guitars that was bought in that fertile period of my life when I was making children and decided to buy something as a recognition of a new kid.
That's excellent.
I went into Guitar Village intending to buy another Les Paul because, again, I have a sickness, and then saw and then played this, and I just fell in love immediately. It was just it just fits. It just fits in my hand. It's one of those guitars that it's beautiful to play. Couldn't put it down. Didn't have a 335, and just went, yeah, I'm having that one. And I played it for a good couple of weeks and nothing else when I first got it home. And then it's pretty much sat on the wall there, just looking beautiful, and gets taken down every now and again for a setup and a string change and a little twang, and then back it goes on the wall. So
yeah, I've got to say, like, if that was on my wall and that was my guitar, it'd be the guitar that gets the most looked at for sure. But I'd probably play it the least as well. Out of I don't know. I don't want to say fear, but there's a reverence for that style of guitar that I have, for that period of guitar making in Gibson's history. You know, the 60s, when after the Les Paul late 50s kind of era, when they were making those kind of, center block semi-acoustic, semi-acoustic guitars, these arch tops and these thin line kind of cross between, the more modern electric guitar and the jazz boxes they used to make. There's something about that era which I just find so fascinating. And having grown up being a huge Clapton fan, he was obviously playing the cherry red one in the 60s, and he played that throughout his whole career. And more importantly, when I first got into playing guitar, when Clapton was doing rehearsals and stuff for his blues tour in the early 90s, he was playing a Sunburst, Tobacco Burst 335 in rehearsals, which was just beautiful. So I think I'd be the same if I bought that guitar. I definitely would be kind of, playing it the least. I certainly probably wouldn't gig it either. It would be a very private, personal kind of affair. But how do you is that a harder purchase to justify? This is the thing, right? How do you justify these kind of purchases? You have to have a very personal reason.
So I don't find it too difficult to justify buying particularly guitars guitars like that from a purely financial investment perspective, because depending on your view of money and overall investments and things, it's probably, if you buy guitars like that in some instances and you're able to, once you've taken care of all of your other household expenditures and got enough savings for a rainy day and all of that kind of good logical practical stuff, make sure the kids are fed, all that, your money needs to be working for you in some way, right? Because if you just stick it in a bank with interest rates the way that they are and inflation the way it is, that money is going to devalue if it just sits there doing nothing. So smart advice would be, make sure that you're making your money work for you in some way. Now, there's different ways you can invest money, right? You can put it on the stock market and gamble your money that way, and hopefully it comes good, which generally history's told us it does. If you put it on the right stocks and shares, you can put it in bonds, you can do all kinds of things with it. But there is a very real cohort of people that might not be guitar players, but like guitars, like to look at them and recognize actually that some instruments are a decent enough investment, and you buy it now and it will appreciate in value. Now, that's not necessarily why I buy guitars. I'm not an investor, and I don't keep these in a bank vault or will stick them under a bed in the hopes that in 20 years time I can flip it and sell it for more. I'll never sell these guitars, but in terms of a justification to purchase it, to have it to look at, to play it occasionally and still not gig it, I'm fine with that. And again, this was bought as an heirloom piece to hand to my children who are learning to play guitar and are into guitar, and even if they're not, they will treasure it. So in the same way that you might have a nice piece of jewelry or a watch or something that you can give. Yeah. So I think you can justify it like that from a financial perspective. Can you justify having it and not gigging it as a jobbing guitarist to play it in the way it was intended to be played and fulfill its purpose? That's a different argument. And that's the bit that probably fills me with guilt and kind of like, anxiety. But yeah, I heard for the first time in the last month, the best reason for relict guitars and road-worn guitars that I've ever heard that really resonated with me. And I don't particularly like relic or road-worn or player grade guitars necessarily because I like guitars to look, clean. And not beaten up. But there was there's a YouTube video of Mick from That Pedal Show buying a new Strat, and he's really particular about his Strats and what he likes. It's a great video if you haven't seen it. But there's this bit where he talks about the fact that why he likes relic road-worn guitars that got chips and dings and dents all over it, and that's what he would purchase in his next guitar. And it's because he doesn't then have to have any anxiety or worry about what will happen to that guitar in his hands if it gets knocked or dinged or damaged. And what he found was that when he had pristine guitars and really clean, brand new, shiny guitars, he did worry about that, and he did worry about damaging them. And it gave him a level of anxiety that then meant when he was playing them, the guitar was getting in the way of his playing. And I think it's a similar train of thought to what you just mentioned, which is, if you had those types of guitars, you would have this kind of reverence for it, or you'd be thinking about the guitar in a way that gets in the way of your playing. And
I think so.
And that kind of made a lot of sense to me. And I was like, do you know what? That's why I don't gig those guitars, because I'd be worried about them getting stolen. I'd be worried about them getting damaged. I'd be worrying just like thinking about the guitar itself while I'm playing it, just in terms of how I'm using it, how I'm playing it. Whereas the best moments playing live is where the guitar is a tool and it just allows you to express itself, and you're not worried about going crazy on it, and you're just worried about making it sound great. So yeah, don't know.
I really like that, actually. I think there's a lot of sense in that, because I've got to admit I've kind of struggled to understand over the years why people love I think relic guitars do look good in some instances. I think there's some guitar makers out there that make amazing aged instruments, and not just from a kind of artistic point of view, but obviously they're trying to make a really good ergonomic guitar as well, and maybe kind of pay tribute to to other guitars that they've seen and played in the past. But I've never really thought about it in the same way as what you said. Mick Taylor from That Pedal Show has spoken about, which is kind of, it's almost like you're buying a guitar that the damage is already done, and you can kind of get on with the artistic side of playing guitar and not worrying about protecting your instrument. But I've always kind of, at the same time, I've always kind of had this thought in my mind that it's inevitable that you're going to, put your mark on things, really, depending on, unless you've bought a guitar and you absolutely want to keep it pristine, like that 335 of yours, you absolutely want to keep that in perfect condition. So you treat it accordingly, you don't put it in a position where it's going to get damaged. But if you buy a guitar that's pristine and you want to gig it, I think you have to, submit yourself to the fact that it's going to pick up some damage along the way. But I've always been of the mind that I want the guitars that I own to I want to be able to explain away what certain marks and things are. I don't want somebody to look at my guitar and go, oh, look at all those scratches. That's cool. How did that happen? Was that, from particular gigs? And then I go, oh no, I bought it like that. It kind of feels, I've always thought as good as relic guitars look, I've always felt there's something a little bit lame about that. Whereas if damage is done, like my Les Paul, my Epiphone Les Paul, which is, it means a lot to me, that guitar. That was a 21st birthday present from my parents, and the first guitar I owned, which I really thought was like, this is a great, great instrument. Before that, I had a Yamaha Pacifica, which was great, but it still felt like a beginner's instrument. And this didn't. I've had that 20 years now, and it's got a lot of road wear on it. There's cracks in the top of it, and not from light, not from age, from it being knocked off its stand at a gig once, and it fell face first, and like the original volume caps, they on the pots, they shattered, and the lacquer on the top cracked, so it's got some damage there, and there's a few marks where it's kind of been caught during gigs, or maybe I've lent it against an amp rather than putting it on a stand and it's fallen off, and there's history in it, but I can explain it all away. I can pick that guitar up and look at it, and like I've just said to you now, I can remember gigs and times with friends and certain nights of my life based on the scratches and the wear and tear that's on my instrument. And I'd always prefer that over looking at something that looks like it's been played and favoured well for 50 years, when really that's just, the creations of a very skilled luthier.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone in that. I hear that a lot when I speak to other guitarists, is this notion of that they're not like afraid about any dings and chips, and that they accept that that's inevitable and part of the working life of an instrument. And in some ways they come to love those bits because it's their history and their story with that guitar, but they want to create that story rather than someone else faking it on the guitar for them. I think that's quite a cool way of looking at it. But tell me, how did you feel when that guitar landed face down on the ground and cracked the lacquer and broke the tone knob? Did you feel that horrible sick feeling that, oh, my beautiful guitar is no longer a beautiful pristine guitar? Or did you feel B, whoa, that's unfortunate, but that's happened, but okay, cool, it's kind of now got that story behind it, and off we go. It's collecting history. Yeah. How did you feel?
I did, honestly, actually quite angry.
Right.
Genuinely quite angry at the time because, well, for a number of reasons. One, it wasn't me that did it for a start. It was somebody else in the band who knocked the guitar over. So there's a frustration there because you kind of want to be the one that does the damage if you're going to do the damage, right? So I was frustrated then, but I came to terms with it really quickly, super quickly. First thing I checked was it still worked because I had a gig to do, right? Everything still worked fine. There was nothing that's going to stop me. It's not like all of a sudden the truss rod was out and I needed to, reset up the guitar in 10 minutes or anything. So it took it really well. But I am reminded of that every time I look at that guitar now. And although now it's kind of like anything that anything that happens in your life where at the time it feels painful and then later on you learn to laugh, anything like that, it's kind of like that now. I laugh about it now and I look at it because I think that was a funny time. It was a funny gig and it was a good fun. It was with friends and things like that. But at the time, for sure, it was painful. It was painful.
Just reminded about how well-rounded and stable you are as an individual. I would love to have that disposition and outlook on life. Where you just go, so first of all, you're human and normal because you felt a bit pissed at the time it happened. Like, damn it. Yeah. And then you kind of came to terms with it. And now it's kind of like, it is what it is. And now you're telling me it's part of the provenance and history of this instrument, which you kind of still think about in a bad way, in a good way, but in whatever way, it is what it is. I don't have that good mental health. I have guitars that I gig that if it does get a ding or a chip or a nick on it, I repair it until it's invisible and it's gone. That's not healthy.
No, I don't think that's not healthy at all. I disagree. I think that's your perspective, right? I mean, that's you trying to... I think what you're doing there is you're kind of... You're trying to take care of the instrument so that it can be like somebody would polish scratches out of their car, or maintain the potential of something as much as it can have. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. But I guess for me, it's I've got to be honest. If I'd have done that at home, let's say I damaged my guitar at home, running the Hoover into it or something, I might do the same. I might want to repair it because I might want never to tell the story to somebody. Oh, cool. How did you get that damage on your guitar? Well, I ran the Hoover into it. Do you know what I mean?
It's not very rock and roll, is it?
It's not rock and roll in the slightest.
It's not like you were reshooting the Queen video where they're all dressed up in drag and he's pushing a Hoover around and you knock the guitar off. It was literally you're just doing the chores.
I think you have to have faith that time will bring perspective, right? And that even if right now something happens at a gig that puts a scratch on the back of your Strat or something like that and you're annoyed about it, I think you have to remind yourself that, hey, actually in 10 years' time, that scratch is going to remind me of this fun gig I had. So I shouldn't worry so much about it. If anything, it's going to gift me with that memory further down the line. So it's a perspective thing. That's
cool.
Why? What on a? If I got a relic guitar that I know has just been made, that's meant to look like it's been played for 50 years, not one single beautiful scratch on that guitar is going to bring me a memory of something that happened all that time ago. I'd rather just accept the fact that there's going to be some short-term pain eventually in the future when I accidentally scratch or put a mark in something, and just remind myself that I can let it go and that at some point it will actually be something I'm grateful for. So what I think what I think you should do is, after this podcast, I think you should start throwing keys at your guitars. just start throwing stuff. Just get tools out and drill bits and things, and just start tossing them at all your guitars, and it'll be painful. But in 10 years' time, when your guitars are worth nothing, and all you have is just a lot of scratched and broken wood hanging on your wall, you'll be reminded of this day, and you'll go, "Oh, that was a good day. I'm pleased that this."
That was the day it all finally got too much, and I couldn't take curating this collection anymore, and I just destroyed them. Now, do you know what? Though, in all seriousness, I don't mind light scratches. I don't mind patina on the metal parts. I don't mind all of that. It's big chunks knocked out of it, or big bits of finish that get, dings and chips. Those are the things that bother me. But do you know what? Actually, since that video that I watched only a couple of months ago on YouTube where that kind of philosophy around a guitar getting in the way of your playing if you're obsessing about how it looks or getting stolen at a gig or whatever. And what you've just talked about as well, about looking back on these guitars in later life and being able to tell people about the stories. This is the guitar that I did X number of gigs on, and this is how this scratch happened on it when I was doing that. There's something nice about them. So I've kind of thought about this a little bit over the last few weeks, and there will be some guitars there that I want to try and keep in that kind of museum-like condition, because they're going to be heirloom pieces and they're going to get handed down, and I want them to be like that. But then there's other guitars that I need to just let have a life and have a story to tell. And those are the ones which I'm happy to go out and gig and need to accept that stuff will happen to them, and that's just part of it.
Like the double neck SG, I think.
Now that's a different story about guitars you should never turn up to a gig playing, unless I don't even know if there is an unless. Really, is there? Unless you're Jimmy Page or Steve Vai, yeah.
I'd going back to the Mick Taylor thing. I'd love to get him on the podcast. I think maybe we should try and reach out and see if he would like to chat. And because I've kind of known about Mick for a long time. He was the editor of Guitarist magazine when I first started reading it. Probably, crikey, it's got to be 15, 20 years ago maybe since he's been in that position. But I'm not a huge That Pedal Show fan. Not because I think it's a bad show. I think it's an incredible show. It's just not for me, really. I'm not really a pedal fan. I'm not really a tone meister like those guys are. Those guys are,
I think,
incredible guys when it comes down to understanding tone and understanding things. And I'm not really that fussed about tone as a guitarist,
Right. I think you should lead with that when you invite him onto our show. That'll probably...
Not really watch your show, mate. Not really for me.
Not really into pedals that much. but
I think he's a very interesting, I find him to be a very fascinating individual in that he has one of the most incredible depths of knowledge about the history of guitar manufacture and playing. He's a fantastic guitarist himself, really, really brilliant blues player. I think he's a very articulate person as well, obviously having worked in journalism for a long time. I've always found him to be a very fascinating individual when it comes to kind of, the guitar world. And somebody like him's, a lot of guitars have passed through his hands. He's interviewed a lot of very famous people in journalism. I think speaking to him, not just about those things, but about what we're talking about today, about gear acquisition, because he's also that video that you mentioned where he'd been spending a long time looking for the right vintage type Strat. That was a really fascinating insight into the motivation behind that purchase as well as the guitar itself. And it'd be really great to kind of continue a conversation like this with somebody like him. He's a really great individual. So even if we don't manage to get him on, kudos to him for being such a fascinating and important person in that kind of conversation in the guitar industry.
Yeah, I like listening to him. I mean, I agree with you, mate. I think that pedal show is brilliant for those that are really into their boutique pedals and, obsessed to the nth degree about the quest for the perfect tone or building the perfect board. And it's quite I think it is quite a niche show, even within the guitarist community. I don't watch it that regularly unless they're doing something that's a bit more accessible, like, best clone or best tube screamer shootout or whatever. But invariably it's more boutique stuff than that. But I do really like both of them in terms of their knowledge and their kind of some of their wisdom. And so that's kind of where I'm netting out around buying new guitars, though, really, is it's got to be something that's not going to get in the way of playing. And arguably, how many guitars do you really need to go out there and have fun?
Oh, I've got a variation of that question to ask you. You're kind of like the next part in this little conversation we're having is not how many guitars do you need, but how many guitars do you think a guitarist should have in their lifetime?
Oh.
And I guess what I kind of mean by that is which guitars?
Which guitars?
Do you know what I mean? Which guitars?
Which guitars should every guitarist own? And then you'll be fine. Then you've ticked the boxes.
Yeah.
And you've got everything you need. And then anything
exactly.
else on top of it is vanity.
Yeah, because you're kind of there. I say you're kind of there. If I'm looking behind you, you've got a Les Paul, you've got a 335, a Les Paul, you've got a Strat, you've got a Les Paul, you've got another Strat, a Les Paul, a Les Paul. But what I mean is, there's certain classic instruments. Which ones do you think are important for everyone to experience as a guitarist?
So I know people that just cannot get on with Les Pauls at all. They walk into my room and they go, "Oh, I love that," and they're like, "I wish I loved Les Pauls, but I just don't." And I don't know whether because from a playing perspective, a Les Paul does have some compromises, I would say, is the word. I think it's the best looking guitar that's ever been made, personally. There's nothing that appeals to me more than the look of a Les Paul, the carved top, just the shape of it. It just all works for me visually. But as a player, unless you get the right necks, they can be overly chunky. The weights of some of them can be overly heavy. Some people, just don't find the ergonomics of them particularly good. And if they're not well set up, they can go out of tune like nobody's business. So, but I personally would say I don't think you can emulate that sound even with like a double humbuckered guitar. I think there is a definitive Les Paul sound, particularly, for that rock type sound. So I would say a Les Paul, unless you're somebody that really cannot get on with a Les Paul, I would say you got to have a Les Paul in the collection and play it and experience playing them live, because they are just great instruments. Once you find one that works for you, that's set up well, there's no other sound like it for a killer rock sound.
I completely agree, actually. I feel like everything else is almost a derivative of a Les Paul that is in that kind of field, I love the fact that there's a little bit of a fight in the Les Paul when you're playing.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like there's a negotiation taking place every time you're playing a Les Paul.
Yeah.
You're right. You mentioned it as kind of a compromise. People say they don't get on, and there are compromises in maybe the playability, or people who are used to Strats, which are obviously flat, and a Les Paul kind of there's a rake on the neck that leans back away from the body, and there's things about a Les Paul that might make less ergonomic sense to people who are more used to more ergonomic instruments. But I like that fight. I can feel it when I play my Epiphone. Yeah. If I go backwards and forwards between my Les Paul and the Strat, there's something about that little bit of a fight back in the Les Paul that makes me play differently. And depending on how I feel, it can be a really rewarding thing to sit and play a guitar like that. I guess it just depends on the player.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's that fight in it that.
Yeah,
it somehow adds to something when you're playing some of those kind of rock riffs or lead runs. I don't know. Yeah.
And do you know what, actually, thinking about now people who've spoken about Les Pauls in the past and all the different Les Paul players, everyone seems to say a lot of the same things, which is it can be quite hard to find the right Les Paul, given maybe variations in, build quality, designs, how they built things over time. But what they all agree is that when you find the right one, it's like pure magic,
Yeah. Exactly.
And
right.
you never really hear that. I never hear that about any other guitars. You never really hear.
No.
Strats seem to be much more kind of stable. Strat's a Strat kind of thing. You'll find good ones and bad ones, but generally speaking, the overall experience is there. Whereas you find the right Les Paul and it is just absolute pure magic. That seems to be. I've never experienced that myself, but that seems to be something I've heard quite a lot.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. There's something about just finding that right Les Paul and I'm lucky to have a few that I feel that way about.
Yeah.
Now, but the next guitar is the Strat for me. That is, and I would put that above a Les Paul. And I would say if you're a gigging guitarist, maybe a couple of Strats, really, if you can stretch to it, and that will do you. That will completely do you, because in what you can't do, I mean, you can mod a Les Paul to a certain extent if you need to, pickups wise, wiring, etc. But you're pretty much stuck with with how it is, right?
Yeah.
A Strat can just be, it's a kit guitar, right? Which in its essence, unless you're buying something like uber expensive from the custom shop, where you don't want to kind of touch it, you can take a Strat and just keep tinkering with it as a gigging guitarist to make it, what you want. Don't like the neck profile, change the neck. Don't like the sound of it, change the pickups, change the wiring, change all manner of things with it. It's just such a versatile instrument to keep tweaking, and there's nothing that sounds as good as a Strat again for a lot of stuff live. It's just a killer guitar.
It really is. It's just kind of like, I always feel like, Leo Fender did for the acoustic guitar or for the electric guitar what like Henry Ford did for the horse and carriage, right? It's not like my dad's told me this kind of quote before about Henry Ford, about, he said, when he came out with the Model T, people said, oh, you gave people what they want. And he said, no, I didn't give people what they want. If I gave people what they want, I would have given them a faster horse, or a stronger horse. It's not the same thing. And I kind of feel like, the innovation that Leo Fender brought to the electric guitar in that first broadcaster, was it a broadcaster? Thinking back to the pub quiz. Yeah. The broadcaster and then the telly and the Strat, that innovation really translated so well into, what guitarists could then do and what they created with those instruments. And then I think the next one is the telly, Les Paul Strat. I think people should own a telly. I've never owned a telly, but I've played some good ones. And I still want to own a telly at some point.
Yeah, I'll get around to it as well. I've played a few good ones, like you said, but it's never been one that, I'll tell you what, and that's a really silly thing, it's just the look of it. It's not a shape that I look at and go, that looks like a beautiful guitar. But when you play one, then you get it and you go, I get why people like a telly. There is a sound, there is a distinctive sound to it, and it's cool. It's a good sound.
And I got to say, I don't think anything looks better relicked than a telly.
That's
Nothing.
True.
I don't think.
That's true.
Strats look great, relics, Les Pauls, anything, I think, with the right amount of relicking. But tellies look fantastic when they look like they've been dragged through a bush for like 40 years. True. They just really do, don't they? They look fantastic. Because they've got that kind of essence about them as being like, this isn't an instrument, this is a tool.
Yes.
Isn't it? This is something to be thrown around and used, not something to be kind of, taken care of. That's the kind of feeling I get when I think of a telly.
I feel exactly the same. That's why I've never bought one, because it looks very functional in its approach, and you play it and you go, yeah, it is functional in a really good way. But it's not beautiful to look at in the same way as a Les Paul or a Strat or a PRS or even some of the Ibanez stuff or Music Man. It just looks like a functional tool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What's next? Do you think?
I think we need to. I think. Well, sorry. As in terms of guitars in rank order, I thought what's next is. On the episode entitled "Don't Buy Any More Guitars," is that Matt and Kieran go out and buy tellies.
Yeah,
because we just realised
actually this episode is turning into. I mean, when I was saying earlier, because I was just basically thinking, what's next in the guitars guitarists should own. If we just keep saying what's next, we'll just come up with every guitar. Really, it should kind of be like a limit 3 or 4, and I think it should be. Like, my opinion is Les Paul Strat Telly 335. I think if you own one of each of those guitars in your lifetime, I think you're experiencing 95% of everything you need to. You could argue that maybe you should get yourself like a Super Strat of a Floyd Rose and, maybe a jazz box as well. But really, those 4 guitars for me are everything. Yeah. Everything that I love and listen to is played on those type of guitars.
I agree completely. And then you get, lovely hybrids that kind of fit into that, with the kind of Music Man stuff, the Ernie Ball stuff, some of the PRS stuff. Yeah. And they're beautiful. They're just amazing amazing, beautiful working guitars, and they're lovely. But I still think they're derivatives of those original, 3 or 4 guitars that you've mentioned that give that quintessential sound.
Well, my understanding of what Paul Reed Smith tried to do in the design development of his like custom 24 shape, that PRS shape we know, not the Santana shape, which is more symmetrical, but that kind of custom 24 style shape, which is the PRS shape, is he was saying that at the time, a lot of the session guys were going around with things like a Strat and a Les Paul. So actually, when you look at the PRS, it's the upper bout of the body where the horns are is a Strat, and then it expands to the Les Paul shape at the bottom. That's all. Apparently, that's all he did. Really, he just overlaid those two classic guitar designs, and just tried to literally try and morph a shape out of, which is interesting, really. But going back to Mick Taylor, he did say on a thing online recently, I wonder how Paul Reed Smith feels knowing now, after all this time working, creating these incredible PRS guitars. I wonder how he feels knowing that his most successful guitar is basically a Strat.
It's the Silver Sky, isn't it? Is that true?
Silver Sky
Is the most
successful PRS guitar in PRS's company history.
Wow,
yeah.
Wow.
I wonder how he feels about that, because it's still an incredible guitar, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he looks at it as more a creation of his own. But I do. It's an interesting question. One may never be asked of Paul Reed Smith.
That's a head over heart question, isn't it?
Yeah.
His head is going ka-ching. That was worth doing. Thank you very much, John Mayer. Keep the money coming, my friend. And then there's a heart discussion, isn't there? Going,
that's it.
Oh, damn it. It's just, deep down, I can tell you all the different things about the radius and the pickups and all the we tweaked and improved. But deep down, Paul, that's a Strat. You know it's a Strat.
It's kind of like Ricky Gervais recently was asked which do you think was better, the American version of The Office or the UK version of The Office. And he said, what did he say? He said, my heart says the UK version, but my accountant says the US version.
Exactly right. Exactly right. That's the answer to the question then, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe that's the same answer from Paul Reed Smith about Silver Sky. My heart says the custom 24, but my accountant says the Silver Sky.
The Silver Sky.
Well, I think we've hit the nail on the head there, dude.
Yeah, man. Really enjoyable conversation. Philosophical, deep at times.
Yeah, it was a bit philosophical.
Yeah, a little bit of coaching involved in there as well. I'm not going to go and take some keys and throw them at my guitars. You'll be pleased to know.
I was worried, actually. I was worried.
Yeah. But I'll try and be less worried when I put some wear on one of them, especially if it's a gigging guitar.
I need to get my guitars to you at some point soon. I've got some setup issues with my Strat, which is, I think I've got potentially some frets that are popping up. I've got some horrible choking out happening in certain areas, which I don't think is just a truss rod or an action thing. I think I'm at a point where my frets need a fret leveling and
definitely.
Because it's been 10 years since I bought the guitar. It's never had a fret job or anything.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Yeah,
let's get that sorted.
Need to get that sorted,
mate. Yeah, I'm well in the vein. There's 4 guitars getting picked up today that have been done, so it's been a busy week for setups and things. So
busy tech this week.
I have, but I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it enormously. So
anything interesting, anything unique, or is it just normal setups?
A Mexican Strat with a really kind of interesting finish, a root beer flake finish on it. Looks super cool.
Wow.
Yeah, really, really interesting guitar.
That's interesting, yeah.
That one's nicely done. What else? We had a telly, a particularly road-worn looking telly.
Cool.
Which is nice. And a baby pink Charvel, which with a roasted maple neck and board on it, which just is beautiful.
Is that Mr. Skinner's guitar?
It is. These are all Mr. Skinner's guitars.
Oh, are they really?
I'm telling you,
wow.
he's treated himself to the deluxe service. So yeah, those are all his. And then I've just done Damo's guitar this morning. One of his Lukes has just been in for a quick turnaround. One of his Lukes. Yeah, one of his Lukes. See, they would have very different conversations with us about this. I don't think, no, Damien would feel the same way about a Strat, I'm sure, but definitely not a Les Paul. And he'd tell you his Lukes give him that sound, and I'm sure they do. They do. He's a killer player. So
yeah,
there you go. But yeah, let's get your Strat in, and let's get those frets leveled and make it a happy bunny.
And let's get down to a jam soon as well. I need to play some 12 bars with other people I've never met.
Definitely, man. Definitely. Well, there's no finer place to do it than at one of Damien's jam sessions, for sure.
Brilliant. Let's get it in the diary, and I'll speak to you next week. Have a cracking week, buddy.
And you, mate. And you. Pleasure as always.
Always a pleasure. Never a chore. I'll see you on the next one.
Cheers, mate.
All the best.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks very much for listening to this week's Guitar Smarts podcast. If you liked what you heard, then don't forget to subscribe and like the show on your favourite podcast app. Take a look at the links in the description where you can find links to our social media pages, our support pages, and some other interesting places you can go. And remember to come back next week for the next show. Have a great week. Bye-bye.